So, what is stress? Well, according to the dictionary, there are a number of different definitions, but when it comes to physiology, stress is defined as a specific response by the body to a stimulus, as fear or pain, that disturbs or interferes with the normal physiological equilibrium of an organism. Now, what does that mean in plain English? Well, basically, it means dealing with the fight or flight mechanism that's hardwired into our brains. And suppressing this leads to stress. And all this harks back to your inner caveman or inner cave woman because this sort of thing developed way back in human evolution. And if you think about it, if you were around, 4 or 5 thousand years ago, and you happen to stumble across a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is that this guy is attacking in this picture here, then you're going to want to do one of two things. You're either going to want to fight it and kill it and eat it, or you're going to run like blazes to get away from it before it catches and kills and probably eats you. And so this is how this sort of thing developed in human beings. Well, of course, nowadays you're not likely to come across a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger that's going to try and kill and eat you. But, there are other situations today that will trigger this response. For example, you might have a demanding boss or you might have to deal with an angry customer and you suppress that fight or flight response because you need to talk to this person or calm them down or whatever, and that of course can lead to stress. Perhaps you might have to travel in heavy traffic, and of course that can be very stressful because you never know when someone else in another lane is going to do something stupid. So you have to sort of be on your guard the whole time, and that can be stressful. Perhaps you've got a sulky, recalcitrant teenager at home, and they're making your life very difficult, and of course that can be very stressful. Perhaps you've got financial problems or a big tax audit coming out and you can't fight that and you can't run away from it either. You just have to deal with it, and that can be, very, very stressful. And of course, there's that bane of modern life, the IT problem. And I'm sure everybody watching this has experienced these sort of troubles before, and so you know that that can be very, very stressful. And of course, when we suppress all this in modern life, then that's when the stress levels build up. And modern life can be very stressful, and it does take its toll on our caveman or cavewoman brains. So you do have to learn how to deal with that, learn how to deal with stress in modern life. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video series. And in this video series, we're going to talk about what causes stress, what it can do to you and to your family, and how you can deal with it. And we'll get started in the next video. Did you know there's good stress and bad stress? And we're going to talk about that in this video. Now, it may surprise you, but not all stress is bad for you. If nothing in life causes you any stress or excitement, you may become bored or not live up to your potential. And that's where good stress comes in, because some stress can be stimulating. Now take a look at this photo here. I'm sure you'd agree that this is something that's very dangerous, very stressful. They're in the water, they're going downhill at quite a rapid rate. There's a good chance that they could get thrown out of that raft. They could be injured, but look at the faces of all the people in that whitewater raft. None of them look particularly frightened. They all look like they're having a pretty good time. And this is a good example of good stress in action. Now, here's some examples of good stress, sometimes called eustress. That can be something like playing sport, or working to a deadline, taking an exam or a test, setting yourself a challenge or a goal, or doing something new for the first time. And there are quite a lot of benefits of good stress. It can be motivational. It can enhance learning. It can boost your brain functions. It's good for your internal organs and the skin. And it helps you to relax when the stress is over. You know, all these good things. It'll boost your brain. It gets your internal organs going. It gets you sweating and clears out the pores in your skin. Good stress can be very good for you. But unfortunately, the sort of stress that most people are familiar with will come under the heading of bad stress. And here are some examples of bad stress, sometimes called distress. That could mean a demanding or an unsuitable job. It could be business worries. It could be domestic woes. It could be financial difficulties. It could be travel. The list just goes on and on and on. And there are lots of problems associated with bad stress. It can have health implications, both physical and mental, and we're going to talk about that in another video. It can lead to relationship difficulties. It can cause poor performance at work or at school, and it can be incredibly demotivating, which can lead to burnout, where you just feel that life just isn't worth living. And this type of stress is detrimental because you never get a chance to fully recover from the effects of fight or flight because you're constantly being stressed. You never actually get over it like you do with good stress. For example, if we think back to that photo we looked at just earlier on with the people in the whitewater raft, they're going to get over that stress and they're going to look back and think that they had a pretty good time. But if you're constantly in a heightened or threatened state, then of course you never get a chance to get over it. So that's the real problem that happens with bad stress. So what you need to do is you need to get a balance in your life so that the amount of good stress in your life outweighs the amount of bad stress. Can't do away with all bad stress in modern life, but you want to take steps to eliminate as much of it as you possibly can and to make sure that you have enough good stress to make your life exciting. In this video, I want to talk about dealing with workplace stress when you have a job. Now, there are lots of different reasons why you might get stressed on the job. Perhaps the stress is intrinsic to the job. You could have poor working conditions. You might work in a fairly dilapidated building, or the heating and cooling might not be very good. Perhaps it's in a bad neighborhood and you have to walk down a dark alley to get to it. That can be very stressful. Maybe there are time pressures. There's never enough hours in the day to actually do your job properly. Perhaps you've got an excessive workload. There's just too much work to do in the time that's available. Maybe there's low pay. Perhaps you're struggling to make ends meet and working all the hours that there are, but you still don't manage to have enough to pay your bills at the end of the week, and that can be very, very stressful. Or there might be dangers. You might have a dangerous job. You might work at heights, or you might be a truck driver driving a dangerous load, or you might be a police officer or somebody on the front line where you come into contact with dangerous people or dangerous situations. And that can be very stressful because, again, you're suppressing the fight or flight reaction that's hardwired into your brain. Or there might be a problem with your role in the organization. Your job might be sort of fairly ambiguous. You never really know what you're supposed to be doing or who you're supposed to be reporting to and that sort of thing. And I'm sure everybody watching this has been in this sort of situation at some point where you never really know what you're supposed to be doing until you get told off for not doing it, that sort of thing. And that can be very stressful. There might be some sort of role conflict. You might be having to do two jobs that are not particularly compatible, and you have to find a way to find some sort of a middle ground. But there doesn't ever seem to be that, and so that can be very stressful. Perhaps you're responsible for the actions of others. Perhaps you have to farm things out to another company or another department, and then when they don't do it properly, you're the one who gets it in the ear. That sort of thing does happen quite a lot. Maybe there are divided loyalties where you work. Perhaps you've got someone who you're very friendly with, but they're not doing a very good job, and you've then got to try and balance your friendship with this person with your job and your role within the organization, and that can be very difficult and stressful. Or it could be that you just simply feel that you're underappreciated. Nobody really appreciates the job you do. You put in the hours, you do the work, and there's always some kind of problem. And that can be very, very stressful. Another stress point within workplaces can be career development. Perhaps you've been over promoted. You've been promoted to a job that you didn't really want, but you felt that you couldn't say no, and you're not doing the job very well. Perhaps you've not received the right amount of training, or you just simply find that you're more of a doer than a thinker, or more of a thinker than a doer, that sort of thing. And you find that you're having a hard time coping, and that can be very stressful. Likewise, under promotion, if you feel that you deserve better than you're actually getting, but you're simply stuck in a rut and you really feel that you should be moving on, but you're not able to do it, then that can be stressful. And that relates to the next topic here, job boredom. If you've been doing the same job day in, day out, and you're just bored stiff with it, then that can be very stressful as well, especially if you don't see any way out. Lack of job security can also be very stressful. If you've ever worked for a company that's in financial difficulty, you'll know exactly what I mean. You don't know whether you'll have a job tomorrow, if when you turn up your key is going to fit the lock, or whether the building's been repossessed, and you don't know how you're going to pay the bills if the company goes bankrupt, that sort of thing. That can be very stressful. Or it could be thwarted ambition. You could want to move on, but you find that there's someone who's standing in your way, someone who is stopping you from fulfilling your ambition, from fulfilling your potential, and you feel like you're really hitting a brick wall. And particularly in organizations that are very structured, where you really need to climb up the next rung of the ladder, but there's someone who's making sure that you don't. And that can be very, very stressful indeed. Then, of course, there could be problems with relationships at work. You could have a conflict with your boss or subordinates or co-workers, people that you need to get on with, but you don't. You might have a boss who's very demanding and finds fault with everything. You might have subordinates who don't listen to you. You might have co-workers who are uncooperative or always dump all the rotten jobs onto you, that sort of thing. Maybe you have difficulty delegating. Perhaps you're one of these people who feels that you need to do everything yourself and you can't delegate. And that can be very difficult, especially if you're new into a management role, that sort of thing. Then, learning how to delegate and, of course, being responsible for what you've delegated, being responsible for the people that you've delegated the task to can be very stressful, especially if you're not 100% confident that they're going to be able to do the job properly. And of course, our old friend office politics can be very, very stressful, especially if you work in one of these offices where there's lots of gossip and backbiting and that sort of thing goes on, especially if you work for a big company where this sort of thing tends to be prevalent. And that can be very stressful because if you fall out with so and so, then they're going to make your life difficult further down the line. And you just never really know what's going on. You've got to watch your back the whole time. That can be very, very stressful. And finally, the organizational structure might be difficult where you work. You might have little or no say in the decision making process, for example. There might be budgetary restrictions. You might have to sort of try and stretch things out. You might not be able to have the right equipment that you need. You might not be able to afford to hire temporary staff to do the job for you because there just simply isn't the money. Or there might be other restrictions, which harks back to the last topic. You might have someone who's being difficult and being restrictive, and that can cause lots of trouble. There might be poor communications, things that you ought to know but you're not being told, and then you don't find out until it's too late, and then there's more problems, and so on and so on and so on. Or, of course, as I just alluded to, you might have a company that's in financial difficulties and you're getting people phoning up demanding payment and people turning up on the doorstep saying, we haven't been paid, or people are accosting you in the street saying, I know you work for such and such company, when are they going to pay our bill, that sort of thing. That can be very difficult and very stressful. And you see, all of this stress, all of this pressure, your brain wants to either fight it or flee from it, and you can't because you're just there all the time. And this is when the stress starts to build up. And it might be not one particular factor, it might be a lot of different factors that add up over time that can really cause all the stress. So, what should you do in that type of situation? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to make a note of what's making you stress. Once you've discovered what the problem is, you're halfway to finding a solution. Then you need to develop healthy responses to that. That might be some type of relaxation technique. It might be some way of perhaps if you're in a big organization and somebody's giving you a hard time and it's not really your problem, you can kick the problem upstairs, to coin a phrase, and pass the problem on to somebody else and look for a healthy response, a healthy way, rather than getting mad, rather than sort of bottling it up inside. That is one way of helping to deal with stress. And of course, you need to change what you can change, and you need to manage what you can't change. Particularly if you're in a subordinate role in a company, there's lots of things you can't change. You can't change the actual corporate nature of the business, but you can manage how you deal with it. And the best way to do that is to talk to your superiors. Talk to your boss, tell him or her what the problems are, tell them that you're having such a hard time, and perhaps together you can come up with a solution. But of course, at the end of the day, if all else fails, if you just find you're under too much stress, then find another job. I know in difficult economic times that's easier said than done, and it can be hard to find another job, but bear in mind, your health is very important. And if you suffer the effects of stress, on your health, which we're going to talk about in another video, then quite frankly, money isn't worth having poor health. You need to find some other way of making a living that isn't quite so stressful. Now, a lot of people, when they're in a job, think, well, if I had my own business, that wouldn't be quite so stressful. Well, perhaps and perhaps not. And we'll talk about that in the next video.